All right, we're back. Welcome into, I guess, sort of the first official episode, now that we've decided on a title, to The Hard Fowl. I'm your host, Pearson Fowler. With me, as always, Collyn Taylor. And a new location today, too. I feel like there's some reverb in this room, more than there normally is, so sorry if it sounds different, but we are in the podcast studios of 107.5 The Game, surrounded by a bunch of cool posters and some various Gamecock memorabilia. I'm looking at a picture of Sindarius Thornwell, the year, I guess that was his senior year. They're wearing the cool, like, I don't know what this trunks
camo.
are. But yeah, you see Karl Anthony Towns back in the picture, and Sindarius is about to drain a runner or a floater. I don't know.
He was the king of the mid-range when he was here.
He was great.
Yeah, I was talking with my roommate. He was a big Syracuse fan, so it was all zone, and he said the only person that really can break it is a guy like Sindarius who can actually turn around and hit that mid-range.
And Carolina could use a guy like that right now.
Yes.
We've been away for a while. The last time we spoke, the last podcast that we did was called Marquee Win, because South Carolina had just notched one heck of a marquee win, maybe the greatest win in at least Frank Martin's tenure here when we talk about regular seasons, against Virginia up in Charlottesville, number 9 in the country. And you and I joked late in that podcast, I said the only way that Carolina can screw this up is if they go and lose to a team like Stetson, but more likely than not, they're going to take a 3-game winning streak into SEC play, and they're going to have some momentum. They're going to have that marquee win. They will have more than made up for the Boston loss, and then they lost to Stetson 63-56 this past Monday. Sorry we haven't done a podcast since then. We've been celebrating Christmas and New Year.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, did you have a good Christmas and New Year?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah,
Got to spend it with fiance and family and all that fun stuff.
Good.
So, yeah.
Very good. So, Carolina basketball was a little more eventful over that stretch than we anticipated.
Yes.
This is a little bit late, but better late than never. Carolina lost to Stetson. Collyn, what the heck? That wasn't supposed to happen.
Yeah, and I don't think. I mean, there was a point. There really wasn't a point up until maybe the final 2 minutes of the game where I was like, this is actually going to happen, because South Carolina had been playing so well. Even if they lost to Houston, they played in a vacuum pretty decently in that game. They got good shots. They just didn't shoot the ball well. And then, of course, Clemson and Virginia. You didn't expect this. You kind of figured that they would start slow, being off for whatever it was, 6, 7 days, 8 days. And then just kind of turn it on about midway through the second half, and that just never happened. They looked about as, not lazy is really not the right word, but lethargic.
Yeah, there wasn't a lot of energy.
Yeah.
It took them 6.5 minutes to get a defensive rebound.
Yeah, like, I mean, it's amazing that, I mean, they just weren't boxing out. They were settling for just awful three-pointers instead of trying to get the ball in the paint. They didn't attack the defense. I mean, they were playing zone. They didn't attack it the right way for South Carolina. And you got almost zero out of the two guys that really put the team on their back against Virginia, and Jair Bolden and A.J. Lawson. And when those two guys aren't playing, and then when they are playing, they aren't playing as well as they need to, then, I mean, for lack of a better word, you're screwed. Because, I mean, you're relying then on Trey Hannibal and T.J. Moss and all of these young guys, and that's not a formula for success for South Carolina.
There are a lot of things that went wrong, and we're going to go through sort of all the specifics of what happened. And a lot of things have to go wrong when you have a loss that's this bad, a loss that you have estimated is the worst regular season loss under Frank Martin. This is a team that was ranked number 321 by KenPom going into the game, and that's out of 353 teams.
Yes.
So a truly horrible Stetson team. A game that, even though South Carolina did all these things poorly, they missed half of their free throws. They didn't shoot well from three. Jair Bolden did almost nothing. A.J. Lawson played whatever it was, 6 minutes in the second half. It was just an all-around abysmal performance. Poor rebounding, especially in the first half. Not doing a good job of generating good shots, much less making the ones that you did generate. And yet, this was still a very winnable game, as it should be, because Carolina is a significantly more talented team than Stetson. So I don't know if my primary takeaway should be, well, actually, Carolina isn't yet at the point where they can win these kinds of games, because clearly they didn't, and they lost it by 7. But to your point, it was up until the last couple minutes of the game that it was like, oh, shoot. Because Carolina made a run there. They were
down to like 2 points with like...
Yeah, it was 51-40, and they went on a little 9-0 run, cut it to 51-49. You're like, okay, like this is a little closer than it should have been, but ultimately you get the win. You don't feel great about it, but all that matters is you get that W.
You're 9-4.
Exactly, 9-4 going into SEC play, 11-7, especially with the Virginia win, especially if you get one more good win in the SEC, is more than enough to make a solid case for being an at-large team. And then it just didn't happen. It was sort of the opposite of the Virginia game, where it gets tight. And in that game, Carolina excelled, and they were able to pull away from Virginia. In this case, they got the game got tight, and then they got tight, and obviously weren't able to finish the comeback.
Yeah, and it doesn't help when, for the last 7 minutes and 15 seconds, your best player, arguably, A.J. Lawson, is on the bench. And he was so clutch late against Virginia because he's so good at being able to get to the rim. He's your best free throw shooter, and when you miss 12 of your 24 attempts, it's usually not going to go well for you. So not having the guys that have been there before on the court consistently hurts you. And Mike Coates battled through foul trouble, and you had a lot of guys wilt down the stretch and get quiet and kind of go into a shell instead of someone outside of A.J. Lawson and to a degree Mike Coates there's not a lot of guys on this team right now that can just flip a switch and take over a game. Jair Bolden showed flashes of that, but right now you just don't have that guy, and when A.J. Lawson's on the bench, it's really hard to win games because of that.
So to me, that's the biggest story coming out of this game and the most complicated thing to examine. And I talked about this a little bit on my local show on 107.5 yesterday. It's so hard because so much of what we do in sports is litigate based on results. And if South Carolina had won this game with A.J. Lawson sitting on the bench, you would have said, wow, what a great coaching decision by Frank Martin. He went with the hot hand. He kept Cousinard and Hannibal in there, and they propelled this team to victory. But because South Carolina lost, it's a bad decision. But what I like to try to do as much as possible, and it's very difficult, some would say impossible, is like just based on the process, not based on the results. What is the right decision? I am someone, and I have a feeling you're going to agree with me, that just says, I don't care how badly he's played. I don't care. He had some sloppy turnovers. You can say his defense wasn't up to snuff, whatever. He is your best offensive player, as you're saying, the one guy that you can consistently rely upon to, when you need it, create his own shot, make his own shot. I feel like he just has to be in the game down the stretch.
Yeah, and I mean, he's a projected first-round pick in the NBA draft. He's a guy that is going to get NBA buzz after this season, regardless of how he does right now, just based off his, length, his ability, all of it. And you want that guy out there on the court. That's like Georgia not having Anthony Edwards in the game down the stretch of a close game, regardless of how he played. And it's not my team. It's not my decision to make. It's Frank Martin's decision to make. He gets paid a lot of money to do it. But if I was the coach, you want the guy and Lawson's been the guy for, the better part of 2 years now. And you're going to want that on the court just because, they're playing you in zone. And to beat a zone, you either got to shoot out of it, which South Carolina was not going to do, or you have to drive to the rim, get fouled, or make buckets doing that to get them out of it. And Lawson was the only player on that team Monday to hit multiple three-pointers. He, weirdly enough, led the team in scoring in the second half and was the fourth highest plus-minus. So even if the eye test, you look at it and say, okay, he's not playing well, statistically, he's one of their better guys on the team, and you have to play your guys when you're doing that. And like I said, I'm not Frank Martin, but if it's me, I'm putting A.J. Lawson out there for the better part of that.
And it's such a Frank Martin thing to do. I had actually forgotten this detail until somebody mentioned it on the show yesterday, that it was the Stony Brook loss. They lose by 2, and Chris Silva sits like the last 8 minutes of that game, right? Yeah. 8 of the last 10 or something like that. And that's so frustrating. And I think you and I both probably do this a healthy amount. It's not like, what a terrible decision, because I think we both acknowledge that if we could be Final Four coaches, we would be Final Four coaches. But I think it's also fair to ask some of those questions. And some of the things that bother me about Frank Martin, we've talked about it on this podcast, is how I guess short a leash he has with some guys. Is when we were talking about Trey Hannibal wondering where the heck he was. I just wanted to see Frank Martin give him a chance to go out there and make mistakes and work through those mistakes. And I think he's let him do that a little bit more in the last couple of weeks, and Carolina's really reaped the benefits of it. And when it works, like when he gives Trey Hannibal a little bit longer leash, or even to go back to the Stetson game, Carolina didn't score in the first 3 minutes. He pulls, was it Bryant, Lawson, and Bolden, like way quicker than he normally does. Within 3 minutes, he puts in Hannibal, Moss, and Frank. And the first thing that happens is Hannibal gets a steal, passes it up to Moss. Moss assists to Hannibal. Carolina gets their first bucket. They force a turnover. There's life. There's energy back in the game. And so when he does that and it works, it's like, oh, that's great. But then the second half was the exact opposite. Like I said, he benches Lawson and it just doesn't work. So maybe it's easier to criticize. And it's even, I think, further complicated by the fact that when Carolina did cut into Stetson's lead, that 9-0 run, I guess it was, to get it from 51 to 40 to 51 to 49, I think that was it. It was Cousinard, Hannibal, who were both playing better than Lawson at that point.
Yeah.
You have Minaya at the 3, and then you had Kotsar at the 5, and then Levesque played some of those minutes, and Frank played some of those minutes.
Yeah,
and it's like
Kotsar was dealing with foul trouble.
Right. So, but it's like you're going on a run here. These guys are playing well. They're probably better than AJ. So, whom are you taking out to put AJ back in there? Because
Right.
Kuznarp was playing well, and he's a good free throw shooter. And Hannibal, I think, I don't know, did Hannibal have the best game of any Carolina player on Monday?
Probably. Him and Wildens actually played really well. Yeah, and it's weird. I mean, you can make the argument to take Levesque out since he's a freshman in that moment and put Lawson back in, shift Bryant to the 4, whatever you want to do. But it's weird, like, and Lawson turns the ball over far too much. I think he'll be the first one to tell you that from this season. Yeah, it's weird. And I think going back to Trey, I mean, he gives you that spark, and I'm always a big guy, and this kind of clashes with Frank's system of doing things, but to kind of give guys longer leashes. And you see it a lot in basketball to a degree, but baseball, if in a sample size sport, which basketball and baseball are, you need more reps. And when you're not getting those and you're only getting a certain select, you're usually tense when you do it. Look at Justin Rowe, his junior year at baseball, when you're only getting an at-bat once every, 5 at-bats every 2 weeks, you're probably going to be tense for that. So players, when they go into games and they know the first mistake they make or the first bad screen they set, they're getting pulled, it usually tenses you up a little bit. Now the Gamecocks, South Carolina has some depth, so it doesn't hurt as much, but you want to have your players feel like they're trusted by their coach. I'm trying to find nice ways to say this.
No, but yeah, I mean, I think
Yeah.
a lot of guys, especially young players, are probably intimidated by Frank Martin, and
Yeah.
there's some extent that you know what you're getting into because his reputation precedes him, and I don't think he's like sugarcoating anything about his coaching style or his program or the way he practices or the way he plays on the recruiting trail. But I think it's different once you get in there, and
Yeah.
I think it takes a certain kind of guy like Trey Hannibal, who's shown a lot of resilience.
Yeah.
The ability to work through those mistakes while being berated by Frank on the sideline, and I mean that's why we see a lot of roster turnover, to be frank about it, and no pun intended.
Yeah.
But so it does take a certain kind of guy, and then when they can excel, you see guys like Chris Silva and Sindarius Thornwell. When you can withstand that kind of tutelage, tough love, whatever, he's an excellent developer. He really knows what he's doing. But you wonder how it does affect some of those guys like Wildens Levesque, who by game 3 or game 4 was in the starting lineup. He started for 6 or 7 games, and then he's been relegated to just kind of garbage time minutes. And when he gets in there, he does well, but it's like he can't. When Frank said after the game that this team does not respond to adversity well, I'm not like calling Levesque out, but it's like it's hard for some of those guys to both get in there and to have an impact, to be able to withstand like adverse conditions within the game, and then also kind of what you're getting from the sideline. So I think that can be hard sometimes, and it may ultimately be why South Carolina. I think we've seen South Carolina be a good tournament team because you're used to facing that kind of. He creates those adverse conditions throughout the course of the year, so they're less adverse when you're actually on the court. But I think you saw it, maybe have an impact on Carolina late in the game because they didn't really seem to have the energy, they didn't really seem to have the confidence, and I don't know if that's on Frank, if that needs to be from the players, individually, if it needs to be from one guy kind of calling them up and calling them together. But it was just, it was really disappointing and really noticeable, and a very stark contrast to the team that we saw that was very confident, that was very exuberant, that was very energetic just 8 days earlier in Charlottesville.
Yeah, and I think that step one is a leader, and Frank Martin called his team front runners. He said that was a bad term, but that's kind of what they are. I mean, when they're in the lead, they play about as well as anybody in the SEC. They force turnovers, they kind of build some confidence about it, but when they don't, that's when the lack of leadership from a player standpoint shows. And they're going to need a guy like Mike Kotsar, who, Frank said, and I kind of agree with him, he's just too nice to be the kind of guy that, for lack of a better word, gets in your ass and, goes out there and lights a fire under you. But they need a guy like an AJ Lawson, a Keyshawn Bryant, a Jermaine Couisnard, or, Justin Minaya a little bit to start becoming that vocal guy. And, knowing Justin the little bit that I know him from press conferences and dealing with him, that personality is there, but it's not to the forefront that maybe a Jermaine or a Keyshawn is. And one of those four are going to have to step up because this team is in desperate need of somebody to call people on their bad habits and get them playing well. Because, for the grief that people have given Frank, he can't do everything. He can't coach the team, help create the game plan, run practice, do all that, and lead this team. He needs some of the ownership to come from the players. And right now you're not getting as much of that as you did in 16 or 17 or with Chris Silva the last 2 years.
And it's tough now because, I mean, that's why you have 13 non-conference games to start the season to work this out before you get into conference play. So they've sort of run out of time, and I think that's a big factor. You know, it's not just that they lost to Stetson, it's the fashion in which they lost to Stetson that has Carolina fans, I think, so pessimistic headed into SEC play. And it's not a foregone conclusion. You know, these teams, Frank Martin teams, do get better. And I'm going to ask you a weird question, but one that I think might be a fair question, and just a little bit, just in terms of what the expectations should be headed into SEC play. But you are still 8-5, and I think this is correct for people to feel this way. But it's funny how differently people feel now with Carolina being 8-5 with a win over Virginia and a loss to Stetson than if it were reversed.
Right.
If Carolina had gone to Charlottesville, lost by 12, and then beaten Stetson by 19, I think people would be like, okay, like 11-7's close. You probably need to go 12-6, but like there's still some good things here. You beat Clemson, like, you know, if the Virginia loss were respectable, it's like, yeah, there's some improvement here. But now it's like doom and gloom. Even though you did flash that you can compete with one of the best teams in the country on their court, and I'm surprised a little bit, but I also think it's correct for people to be a little bit more cautious, even though we have seen this team flash such a huge upside.
Yeah, and I think that if you had told people at the beginning of the season South Carolina going into conference play was going to be 8-5 with a win over Clemson, they would have taken it. But the fact that you played so well for a month and then lost arguably the worst non-conference loss of Frank Martin's tenure doesn't bode well. And there's a reason to be pessimistic. I'm not one of those people. I think that it's not always as bad as it seems. It's not always as good as it seems. But there's a lot of work to do now to get this resume back to tournament level. And you made up for your Boston loss with your Virginia win. But now you have another bad loss on your schedule.
Even worse than the Boston loss.
Yeah, by far. Yeah, by far the worst. I mean, to have two quality wins, three to a degree with three road wins, all of them against a UMass team that's pretty okay. That's a quad 2 win. Clemson's a quad 2 win. And Virginia's a quad 1 win. Then you lose a 2 quad 4 win, like to 2 quad 4 teams. Like that's not like you're going to need so much work to do in you're going to have to go at least 11-7.
Right.
At floor to even make the tournament or even be in the conversation to make the tournament.
So you know the math of this and the history better than I do. I'm putting you on the spot, so sorry if you don't have like a good answer, but I feel like most tournament teams have 0 quad 4 losses. Like I wonder what the percentage of teams that have a quad 4 loss or multiple quad 4 losses, because that's what Carolina's looking at right now, what the percentage of those teams that actually make the tournament, I guess what the percentage is, because I can't imagine it's very high. Because
right.
The math is such a big part of it. And again, even though you do get the quad, they have one quad 1 win and 2 quad 1 losses.
Yeah,
and they're 5-2 against quad 4 teams. That just that's. I feel like there are probably not that many teams in the past couple years, in the past 5 years, 10 years, that have made the tournament with 2 quad 4 losses. But it also doesn't feel like that's completely ridiculous for this Carolina team. You mentioned 11-7 to get into the conversation, 12-6, and you probably have a fairly strong case still.
Right. And I mean, I did the math before the season on just win totals it's going to take. So the average number of wins by an at-large team last year was 23.9. So 24 wins is your average win-loss of an at-large team. 8 teams received an at-large nod with 20 or fewer wins. So there's a chance that you can get to 19, 20 wins. I don't know the losses of those 8 teams, but when you have 2 losses, and Stetson may be the worst loss of a high major team this year.
If Carolina were to make the tournament, that would probably be the worst loss of any team that made the tournament.
Yeah, and so now you have to go out there and you have to beat not 1, but maybe 2 or 3 quad 1 teams in terms of this weird net ranking that not everyone likes and I probably hate. But now you have to go out and beat those teams, and you have to do it handily, and you have to get to now 19 to 20 wins get you in the conversation, but to really feel good about your chances, you got to get to 21, maybe 22 wins, just because this Stetson loss, it's kind of an anchor on your resume, because it just keeps dragging it down, and it's going to affect your efficiency numbers. It's going to affect your net ranking all year. And there's a lot of work to be done now. You're going to have to beat some top 25 teams at home, on the road, wherever, just to feel good about your chances to get in.
Now, the way the SEC schedule shakes out, and we can talk about this a little more specifically, as we are obviously on the precipice of SEC play, the first part of the schedule is tough, but I think when you look at the entirety of it, it is somewhat favorable for South Carolina in terms of the teams that they get to play twice. Some winnable games in there, and you're mixing in. Obviously, there are a lot of good teams in the SEC, so you will have a few more chances. You'll have plenty more chances to get some of those marquee wins. For them to do it, as we sort of wrap up the Stetson game, A.J. Lawson has to play more than 13 minutes.
Yes.
He has to score more than 8 points. He's got to clean up some of those turnovers, and I know all those things aren't going to happen. The turnovers, that might be part of his game, and you just kind of have to live with that. And it's one of the frustrating parts, and also occasionally great parts, because Lawson will sometimes grab a rebound and then throw a 85-foot outlet pass right on the money, and it's like, wow, that was a great bucket, great play by a great player. And then he'll do that 2 more times in the game, and one of them goes straight out of bounds, and one of them gets picked off. And it's just like the maddening, just frustrating part of having a creative
He's
player.
He's boom or bust, and that's what you get when you have guys that are 19 years old playing college basketball.
Right. So, that's the first part. The other things that went wrong in the Stetson game, as we mentioned, that Carolina even still could have overcome them, with A.J. Lawson not playing well. Bolden can't be over, especially when he scored 22. It was weird.
He airballed a 3 to start the game.
And that's when you knew it was just like, oop,
yep,
that didn't look good. Yeah, he did not carry over that feeling from the Virginia game when it was at 22 or 24 or whatever he scored in that game.
Yeah.
But so that can't happen. Carolina 4 of 19 from 3. This is not going to be a good shooting team from any part of the floor, and they didn't shoot badly from 2. What was it, 47% or something from inside the arc? So
yeah,
like a fine number, but 4 of 19, you need just 3 more of those. You go 7 of 19, which is still, it's fine, not great. I don't know what the percentage is because I'm not good at math, but you shoot 7 of 19, you win this basketball game.
Yeah, you make half of your free throw misses, and it's a 1-point game. It is what it make your free throws.
And you missed it. So the free throw, 12 free throws, 12 of 24.
And then the other airballed one.
Yeah.
He airballed a short-armed a free throw.
Well, and right as because I was watching it on TV, right as the TV announcer was like, Jermaine Cousinar, by percentage, is Carolina's best free throw shooter. Airball.
Yeah, no, and it's I think they were a combined 16 of 43 from the line. I did the math today. They're 2 combined from the free throw line and 3-point. They are 225 of 496 this season.
Jeez.
Leaving so many points out there.
Mm-hmm. Well, and the other weird part of the free throw shooting equation, because this number caught my eye, it didn't even feel like it at the time, and obviously at the end, Carolina's fouling to get extra possessions and things like that. But Stetson shot 36 free throws, and on only 27 fouls by Carolina, which is kind of weird. That just means they're probably fouling at bad times, just dumb fouls and things like that, giving them free throws. But not only, that's the first thing that jumps out. It's make 19 of your 24 free throws, which is a good but not staggering number. That's an acceptable normal rate at which to make free throws. But also don't give up 36 free throw attempts, and if they make 6 fewer, 7 fewer, then you're talking about overtime. That's the difference in this game. It still should have been winnable. A couple weeks ago, I guess before Carolina righted the ship, I think it was maybe even before they beat UMass, and certainly before they beat Clemson, obviously before they beat Virginia, I asked you what the number one thing Carolina had to fix to kind of reach its potential was, and you said they need to clean up the defense. And defensively, they've been pretty good. Stetson scored 63, which is, not great. I don't know what their average is, but again, a lot of that was free throws sort of at the end of the game.
Right.
I think it was basically 54 or 55 or something throughout the actual flow of the game before Carolina started slowing it down with fouls. So it feels like the defense has gotten better. We know Frank Martin teams do that. You look at the other glaring things on this team. 3-point percentage, I don't know if that just magically gets better. Some nights you shoot well, some nights you don't.
At this point, you are what you are.
I feel like it's the same thing with free throw shooting percentage. So where now does Carolina look to improve itself on the margins so that they don't lose to Stetson again?
You have to execute better in your half court. This team's shown when it can get out and run in transition, it can compete with a lot of different people. They did that against Virginia. But when a team like Houston comes in or Stetson comes in and doesn't allow you to get out and transition as much as you want, I think they had 10 fast break points against Stetson. Something similar probably against Houston as well. when you're not able to really get out and flow and transition like you want to and play to your strengths with a Keyshawn Bryant, a Trey Hannibal, an AJ Lawson, those guys, they need to execute better, and they're not doing that right now. They're settling for some bad shots. The ball's not touching the paint as much as it needs to, and it's showing. And their points per possession are bad. Their offensive efficiency numbers are not great, and that's something that's worrisome. If they can't execute in the half court, then teams are going to start game planning for that and putting guys back there to make sure they can't run in transition. And if they start doing that and South Carolina can't improve on their half-court offense, then there's going to be a lot more losses in SEC play than wins.
Well, they've been rolling with the same starting lineup for a couple of games now. I think it's the same starting lineup that started against, I think Clemson was the first game, so 3 games now, Clemson, Virginia, and obviously you win both of those games. It's like, wow, this is a great starting lineup. Then you see what happens against Stetson. This may end up being more of a blip on the radar than anything, but if you're going to get another 15-minute 0 point, 0 for 4 from the floor performance from Bolden, do you maybe look at putting Couisnard in there? A guy that, you and I have talked about this a lot now, watching the progression of Couisnard as a playmaker. He flashed that playmaking ability, the feel for the game, the vision early on, but as he seems to be getting more comfortable in Frank Martin's offense, he looks like someone that could actually be the point guard. Bolden was running the point, and I always figured that AJ Lawson would kind of end up being the, for all intents and purposes, point guard where the offense is running through him. But it seems like now there is a road where I wonder if we'll see Couisnard, even if he's not starting, see him and Lawson share the floor a little bit more, with Couisnard handling more of that primary playmaking responsibility, let Lawson be a little more off the ball, try to generate some more open shots for him, run him off screens and things like that, just to get him involved, get him in the game, because obviously he just was not engaged in this game on Monday for whatever reason. Maybe because he was sick too. I heard that he had like a flu or fever or something like that. But point is, I wonder if we will start to see any sort of lineup changes as Carolina gets into SEC play, because yes, it's like that lineup had some high highs, but now, Hannibal's a really solid contributor for 3 games now. He seems comfortable as a freshman. Does he start to take more of those minutes from TJ Moss? Couisnard, how much more do we see his role grow? 23 minutes on Monday, but does he end up being in the starting lineup? And Levesque, who, as you mentioned, only played 7 minutes in the second half and for the whole game on Monday.
They were really productive
7 minutes. Really good minutes. Every time he gets in, he seems to do well. And like I said, he was starting earlier in the year. Do you see him kind of get back into the rotation? Does he take some of those Frank minutes? Not that Frank's playing poorly, but how does this start to shake up, and how much of that is still kind of in flux, and how much of that is changing? And again, you hope to have those things worked out through the first 13 games of the season, but Carolina's still asking a lot of these questions.
Yeah, and I think that to start with, asking a lot of those questions is just inconsistency. Players are just so up and down that you don't know what you're getting night in and night out from some of these guys. I think you're going to start to see the rotation whittle down a little bit. They've been playing, sometimes 9-10 guys a game. I think you're going to start to see that kind of shrink down into the 8 range, 9 at times. I wouldn't hate seeing Jermaine Couisnard in the starting lineup. I really like him in the starting lineup. Leads the team in assists per game, leads the team in assist percentage per game. He's top 300 in the country in assist rate, which is really good when you consider how many players are in D1.
And I don't know off the top of my head his assist-to-turnover ratio, but again, when you're talking about playmaking responsibility, AJ Lawson, he can dish dimes, but he will have those turnovers. 4 assists and no turnovers for Couisnard on Monday, and that's the kind of efficiency that you need, especially for a team that's struggling in the half court. You don't want to give the other team easy transition opportunities when you're having trouble scoring in a slowdown kind of game.
Yeah, and I really like Jermaine and the progression he's made, and I think you're going to start to see Trey Hannibal take a lot more of those minutes, and then it's just kind of figuring out what you're going to get from your other front court options, because they've just been so up and down. Alonzo Frank's actually, offensively speaking, Alonzo Frank's played pretty darn well. I think he's shooting over 65% from the floor. Offensively, he's not the problem. It's defensively where things kind of jumble up for him. But then it's just kind of figuring out what you're getting there. I like Minaya at the 4 right now. Matchup-wise, you could change that up based on who you're playing, but I really like him there. And you need more from Keyshawn Bryant at this point. He hasn't been his same self compared to what he was last year. So
yeah, not over the course of the whole game anyway. You see flashes of it. He almost had a huge putback on Monday.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's got to be more consistent. And you wonder, he came back and played, 23 minutes his first game back against Clemson.
Or UMass,
against
UMass, he
UMass.
played great.
Yeah, he played great, and he played a lot more minutes than I was expecting, like 8 to 10 minutes. He played somewhere in the 20s, and then it's been sort of like up and down. So you wonder how much of that is still just like getting back into the rhythm of it. But he's going to have to be back to at least scoring double digits. He's probably going to have to be like a 12-4, 12-5 kind of guy on a regular basis. I mean, that's just what Carolina needs at this point, especially if your other scoring options, like if on one night you're going to get 22 from Bolden and another night you're going to get 0, you need to know where at least another dozen or so of those points are coming from. So that's got to be Bryant.
Yeah, and at this point in the season, South Carolina just needs to score. The defense is going to get there. I don't know for a fact, but just history tells me with Frank Martin team, the defense is going to get there by 5-6 games in SEC play. Now it just comes finding 65 to 70 points, and right now I can't tell you where that's going to come from. I know you're probably going to get 8 to 12, 8 to 14 from Kotsar every night. Lawson probably going to give you 8 to 20, but that's still leaving standard deviation of that's huge.
Yeah.
Kustar's probably going to give you 6 to 11, but after that, it's Bolden has the potential to go off for 20, but also goes over or whatever it is, and Minaya has chances to go for 18 and gives you 4. So it's one of those where you need more consistency, and that's been the maddening part for this team is that they've shown flashes of being able to. You went on the road to UMass and scored 84 points. You scored 70 points against Virginia. Like, you have the offensive firepower at times to do this, but now guys just have to put it all together, and the pieces have to fit properly. And right now, it's just it's doing it at times, but you've seen it about half the time where it's just not.
It's a blessing and a curse when you have a lot of bodies, when you have a lot of at least theoretical depth, because I think if Carolina had like 2 fewer of these guys, like if they didn't have Trey Hannibal and they didn't have Alonzo Frank, then you're just kind of rolling with those lineups. You get a little more continuity. You allow them to work the kinks out, but it is easier. And I think it's, again, ultimately a good thing and represents the very high upside of this team that it's like, oh, Frank's not playing well? Here you go, Levesque. Go play 15 minutes, get us some rebounds, give us some like energy defense. He's kind of like the Bizarro Frank,
Yeah.
He's just like defense, rebounding, and energy. And
Yeah.
Frank's just like kind of a I don't know, more old school offensive guy that's got some work to do defensively. But it hasn't allowed Carolina to really settle into a rotation. And I think, especially even early in the season, like Keyshawn Bryant is obviously such a huge part of that. You're missing him for the early part of the season. Now he comes back. You get used to playing with him, but now it's like, oh, how do the other guys kind of factor into the rotation? Right. Guys that were used to contributing a little bit more. And again, like you need to have these things worked out by the time you enter SEC play, and they haven't yet. Yeah,
and that's the worrisome part for this is that your margin for error now is so small, given the fact that you have these 2 bad losses on your resume. Good losses, or not, you still have 2 quad 4 losses on your resume. You can't be sitting here figuring this stuff out. I mean, it'd be different if you opened up with not bad, but not as good SEC teams. But you got Florida, you got Tennessee, you got Kentucky, and those are your first 3.
That's Tennessee on the road. You got Auburn on the road, and is that their 5th SEC game or 4th, I think?
Yeah, I mean, you home for Florida, at Tennessee, home for Kentucky, at A&M, and then at Auburn. And then you come back and you play Vanderbilt, and then you play an Arkansas team on the road that's,
top what, 11-1?
Yeah, I mean, they're top. They just beat Indiana, so there's not a lot of room for error, and you need to kind of have your ducks in order early because you slip up and you start 1-5, things aren't gonna. I mean, then you got to go 10-2 down the stretch to even think about a tournament berth.
Yeah, which is just not going to happen. But
No.
I mean, that's the grueling part of the schedule. And I guess as we transition into this, was there anything else you wanted to say on the Stetson game before we move on?
I think we spent far too much time on the Stetson game.
Oh God, it was just brutal. It was a boring and terrible game to watch. But South Carolina, they turned the page. They're focused on Florida now. That's Tuesday. I don't know, probably 7.
7,
yeah, tip time, sometime in the evening at the Colonial Life Arena. So you're starting at home, which is nice. Although Carolina, maybe fair to say they're a better road team than a home team this year, which is kind of unusual. But when you look at the SEC schedule as a whole, you mentioned how tough it is right out the gate. But for those of you that don't know, you play 18 SEC games. There are 14 SEC teams, so you play 5 teams twice, and then you play the other 8 teams once. And the teams that South Carolina gets to play twice, tough with Georgia. They're 9-3 right now. They're 72 in Ken Palm, and they have the reason that's tough is because they have Anthony Edwards, who's going to be a lottery pick.
I mean, he might be 1-1 at this point.
This is a weird year of college basketball because I think like the I don't know what the 4 guys outside of Edwards that are most likely to be the number 1 overall pick do not play in the NBA. It's like LaMelo Ball and James Wiseman, who's now not playing college basketball, and R.J. Hampton, who's playing in Australia or New Zealand, and then somebody else. It's like we don't even get to watch who's going to be good in the NBA next
you have
year.
no idea. You're going to be like weird clapping if your team picks a guy you've seen maybe YouTube highlights.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of weird. But anyway, so Anthony Edwards is like, I mean, he's that's the guy you have to watch out for. So that's tough. You have Mississippi State, who's 53 right now in KenPom. They're also 9-3. But you get A&M. They're 6-5. They're 168, which is below Carolina. You get Vanderbilt twice. They're 8-4. They're 130. And then Tennessee, they're 44. They're 8-4 right now. It's been kind of up and down for them. So in terms of like picking the teams that you have to play twice, that's 2 teams that are beneath you, and then no other team that's better than 5th in the SEC right now. That's kind of what you want. You know, you don't want to play LSU twice. You don't want to play Kentucky twice. You don't want to play, Florida twice or any of those other things. So that shakes out kind of favorably for Carolina.
I think so, and I think that this schedule after you get past the first 6 games, 7 games really kind of opens up for you. The SEC in and of itself is wide open, and South Carolina's always played Tennessee well. They've always kind of had Georgia's number. I think they beat them twice last year. May have beat them twice the year before that too. But you play them well. Vanderbilt's usually not that good. They're not good this year. They're going through some coaching turnover.
Stackhouse. The Stackhouse experiment.
Yeah, how that works, I have no idea. But you feel good. I mean, if you can split with Georgia, if you can split with Tennessee, who doesn't have Lamonte Turner, beat A&M twice, beat Vanderbilt twice, you're looking at 7.
Yeah, 7-3. If you
7 wins.
So you go 2 A&M, 2 Vandy, split Tennessee, split Georgia, split Mississippi State, because all 3 of those teams are.
You win the home game and lose the away game.
Yeah, that's fine. That puts you at 7-3. So then you need to go 4-4 in your other 8 SEC games,
which is feasible.
It's feasible. Because you have, I guess like all the other ones, but you look at the other ones that are going to be I think Ole Miss, that would be a winnable game, but I think that one's on the road if I remember correctly. I don't have the schedule
catch some favorable stuff up too, where you get LSU at home, you get Kentucky at home, you get Florida at home. Your toughest road trip is just the solo road trips where you don't get
Auburn.
home at home is Auburn.
Yeah.
And then you go to Arkansas, which is always a weird place to play, and Arkansas I think is good. I don't know.
I'm trying to remember. I looked earlier this morning, and I've forgotten now already who their one loss is, but I feel like it wasn't a.
They lost to Western Kentucky.
Yeah. So it wasn't a great team that they lost to.
Yeah, and they don't have any. They don't have any great wins outside of Indiana. I don't want to call it a soft 11-1 because it's 11-1, but it's not like Gonzaga, who's played like 14 top 25 teams to boost an RPI. But you have to go on the road there. You have to go on the road to Ole Miss. But you get the big boppers in the SEC at home,
which is nice.
Yes.
And as you pointed out, there are, I don't know what the projection is right now, but there are a lot of SEC teams that I think are projected to make the tournament. There's a lot of good SEC teams, but it seems like there's more variance, like you said, a little more wide open. The frustrating part of 8-5 has been the variance.
Yes.
If it were, if you take away the Virginia loss and give them the Stetson win, if you take away the, I don't know, even the Clemson win and give them, the Boston loss back, and it kind of goes chalk, I feel like people would feel a little bit better about this team because they would at least have a better idea of what their identity was and what to expect from them week in and week out. But it's all variance. But here's my crazy theory that I teased earlier. If with a young team like Carolina that's up and down, there's a lot of variance. You beat Virginia literally the next week, you lose to Stetson. There isn't that much of a variance in terms of the quality of opponent for South Carolina. Like the worst team you're going to lose to this year in SEC play is either going to be Vanderbilt and Texas A&M, and you have to win both installations of that matchup. So I'm not saying that's a losable game for Carolina, but I'm saying in terms of the quality of opponent, the ceiling is dramatically raised.
Yeah, it's not going to bring down a net.
The floor is dramatically raised. The ceiling about stays the same. So if Carolina's going to turn in really variable performances, you probably feel okay about their chances because they can't. It's impossible now for them to have another loss as bad as Stetson, but it is possible for them to have another win as good as Virginia. And so the odds are just kind of in your favor, right? Or am I thinking about this in a totally perverse way?
To a degree. I think you still need to win the games. Right. At the end of the day, you still need, 6-10 or 6-12.
You need math.
You need wins. Yeah, I think that there's not going to be any horrible losses.
Yeah, there's just none
the rest
left.
of the way.
Yeah.
But you need to win the games you're supposed to win. What that is right now, I don't know, because 13 games in, I still don't have a clear picture of what this team is. Win the games you're kind of, I guess, favored in, these toss-up games, and you probably win 10. And then you win one you're not supposed to.
Yeah.
And you feel good about where you are after the worst non-conference loss of Frank Martin's
of ever.
Yeah.
Yeah. So to go back to our hypothetical earlier, you go 7-3 in those 10 games you have against whatever all the teams you play twice, all your home and homes, and then 3-5. Like, that's not unrealistic. That's totally feasible, and that's not enough for Carolina.
Yeah.
To make the tournament. I think we both agree, bare minimum to even be in the conversation is 11-7 at this point.
Yeah, bare minimum to even just be on Joe Lenard, the right side of Joe Lenardi on like Selection Sunday, where it says like teams also on the bubble kind of thing. 11-7, I'll say this: 11-7 probably gets you in the NIT.
It's been a while.
Yeah, that I'll say that 11-7, because you'd be 19-12 at that point. Probably gets you in the NIT.
12-6 requires you to either go 7-3, or maybe you win both against Tennessee, or you win both against Mississippi State, in which case you could still go 4-4 against those solo opponents. I don't know what to call them. Solo opponents? I'm going to call them solo opponents. Yeah. Or you go 7-3 and you go 5-3 against those opponents. Which one of those do you think is more realistic? Given that you do have I guess it's an even distribution, but given that you have some of those big games at home.
Say that again.
So if we're going 7-3 with A&M, Vandy, Tennessee, Georgia, and Mississippi State for Carolina, and then you either have to go 4-4 to get to 11-7 against those other teams, or is Carolina looking at banking on sweeping Tennessee or sweeping Mississippi State or sweeping Georgia, just in terms of how it shakes out, the quality of opponent and where the games are and things like that? Which one of those is a more feasible road to Carolina getting to the win totals they need?
Just looking 4-4 right now, going 7-3 and then 4-4. Because you look at your standalones, Florida at home. I've never been impressed with Florida. I think that's a winnable game. KenPom has it as a 5-point game and gives South Carolina a 33% chance to win. So there's hope there. But then you have Missouri at home. You have Texas A&M. Texas A&M's a twofer, but Missouri home, Ole Miss, who hasn't been great. Alabama. You're looking at. Those are 4 winnable games right there. Yeah. It's definitely feasible, and I would take my chances doing that compared to what having to beat Tennessee at Tennessee, or having to beat Mississippi State at Mississippi State, something along those lines.
So it's Florida at, you have it right in front of you, right, the schedule?
Yeah.
So it's Florida at Tennessee, home for Kentucky, at A&M, at Auburn.
At Auburn.
So Carolina needs to be. You need to win that Florida game.
Yeah.
You need to win the A&M game. You can lose the Tennessee game because that was on the road. You just have to win one of those, basically. The Auburn one you can put in the L category, and then what's the other one? Kentucky.
Yeah, that's
so Carolina can be 2-3 in this first 5-game stretch,
and still feel pretty good,
and
about
it not be kind of over.
It's not the end of the world if they go 2-3 in their first 5 games, just because how good their opponents are.
That feels like a pretty good place to be in. And then 3-2, you steal one of those, you go ahead and get that one win against Tennessee, and then you get them on the flip at home a little bit later in the season. Yeah. Now you're in kind of I don't want to say a good position, because you're still, again, always fighting for wins, always fighting for quality.
You're in a better position than what you would have been, probably. As we sit here January 3rd or 4th or whatever today is.
Third, I guess.
Yeah.
I hadn't done all the math. I looked at this earlier, but I hadn't done all the math until we were sitting here talking about it, and I guess it feels a little better than it did when I was just kind of thinking about it abstractly this morning.
Well, I think that you look at the loss to Stetson, and you look at the way they played, and it's like, well, season's over, but there's some there's optimism there. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but if things break right for you and you beat the teams you're supposed to beat and steal a few like they did last year, then there is an avenue for South Carolina to make the tournament. I am not saying it's going to happen. That is not me sitting here and being this weird homer. I'm just saying that there is an avenue to do it. A lot of things have to go right. They have to figure out a lot of pieces, answer a lot of questions. But there is an avenue for it.
And the kinds of games that they're going to have to steal,
They're home
again. They're home, and this speaks to the variance and like lack of like high end of the SEC. Like I said, Carolina will have the opportunity to have another Virginia type win. I mean, I don't know if that's exactly true. I mean, the best team in the SEC is Kentucky, Auburn.
Auburn's 14, and Virginia's currently 31st in Ken Palm. But Florida's ahead of them, Kentucky's ahead of them, Auburn's ahead of them, Arkansas.
Yeah, and like we'll see with Arkansas, we'll see with Florida, we'll see with some of these other teams.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's close. It may not be like exactly that, and it being on the road, but point is the games that Carolina's going to have to win, they're going to have to steal. I don't know.
Feasible.
What was the line on the Virginia game? How much was Carolina
I can't
a dog?
remember. It was
probably double digits.
Double-digit dog, yeah.
Yeah, and it was like a 10% chance to win. But you mentioned right off the bat, like a game that would be a quote-unquote steal win for Carolina is Florida. That's at home. 35% chance to win. It's a 5-point spread. It's like, that's not that ridiculous anyway.
And they did it last year at Florida. So
now you don't have Chris Silva just like standing under the basket and
dunking,
Who was the Florida defender? He just like mistimed his jump. It's like he forgot how to jump right.
We were talking about moments of the deck before the Stetson game, just about some of the things you can include in South Carolina's just decade, and I think we were all sitting around. I was like, "What about that Chris Silva dunk last year?" I was like, "Oh, damn! Like I forgot about that." Yeah. But it turned the entire season around. So that was.
I think I don't remember if you and I talked about this on the podcast, or maybe we did it for our 107 stories of the year for 107.5. But that was what set the rest of that great SEC season in motion. You lose that game, it's like you don't have the momentum, you don't have the confidence. I mean, like you obviously don't have the win. Like that's the most important thing. But that was the turning point in the season because they were 5-7 in non-con last year.
5-7.
And that was the SEC opener down in Gainesville, and no one thought that was going to happen. And then
and then all of a sudden, Keyshawn Bryant goes on like an 8-0 run by himself, and then Hassani Gravett plays out of his mind, and it was the weirdest game that I've ever been to. And I don't think it even set in for, I think there were 4 or 5 South Carolina media there. I don't even think it set in for them until like driving home from Gainesville the next day.
Yeah. But that was a turning point. And I think Carolina fans, and I may have even said this, and I apologize for planting this seed so cruelly, but I think Carolina fans thought that the Virginia game was going to be the Florida game of last year for this season, and it hasn't been the case. Who knows? Maybe the Florida game for this season will be the Florida, or the Florida game for this season will be the Florida game for last season.
They need something to go right these first 5 games.
Yeah,
100%.
So we're going to get on a more regular schedule here. South Carolina, I said they have Florida Tuesday, and then they have Tennessee on Saturday, and then they're Wednesday, Saturday, the rest of the season, with the exception of the second Mississippi State game, which is I think the first game of March.
Yes, Tuesday,
which is also
March
on a
3rd.
Tuesday. But that being said, we're going to be back every Tuesday and every Thursday. Tuesday will be recap the weekend. Look ahead to the Wednesday game. Thursday will be recap the Wednesday game. Look ahead to the Saturday game. Next week will already be an exception, though. We're going to be back on Monday to preview the Florida game. Obviously, no game to recap for South Carolina this weekend, but we are going to be on a more regular schedule. So to make sure that y'all don't miss it, there you go. But also, rate, review, and most importantly, subscribe to the podcast. Leave us all sorts of feedback at Collyn Taylor with a Y on Twitter. I'm at Pearson Fowler. You can get us there. You can leave a review on the podcast page. But again, most importantly, just subscribe so you don't miss any of this or another Carolina podcast with Chris and Wes and myself. We're going to be back next week to discuss teams of the decade, which I know all y'all at Gamecock Central have been working very diligently on.
Yes.
We'll actually probably have to get you in on that because we need as many voices as we can at the table for
as
the
we just sit there and yell at each other.
Yeah, exactly.
Picks and whatnot.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. Wes texted me about a couple football-related ones, and it was a good, healthy conversation. It's been a very good decade, the best decade ever, or the last decade was, for South Carolina athletics. So a lot of fun things to reflect on. But anyway, for all the good stuff on the Gamecock Central Podcast Network, you don't want to miss it. Rate, review, subscribe. And like I said, give us your feedback. This is a living, breathing entity. We are open to suggestions. We're open to change. We thank whoever suggested Hard Foul for the name of this podcast.
I like it,
because that's stuck. Do we know who suggested that?
I'll find it on Twitter and shout it out.
We'll give you a shout out, in the tweet or probably next podcast or something like that. But thank you all so much for listening. For Collyn, I'm Pearson. We'll talk to you on Monday.